Hello, everybody. Little delay there, but looks like we have some people checking in now, which is great. I see a few people popping in there. Brian, Devin, Jason, awesome. Thanks for popping in. My name's Jasper Blake. I'm the head coach here at the My Endurance Hub space, and this is our weekly question and answer. And we've had such an amazing response to this. I think lots of people asking questions and realizing that it's great to have a connect with a coach every once in a while, even if it's just once a week. A couple little housekeeping items. The first is that these sessions are recorded. And so if you want to go back and review any of the old sessions or the session that you've attended to review some of the answers that I gave, definitely check out the recorded question and answer sessions in the My Endurance Hub space. If you do want to ask a question, the best way is to pop into the chat function. So you'll see the bottom of your screen there. There's a little kind of chat icon. You can click on that, and that's where all the chat happens. And I answer the questions in the order that they appear. We've so far been successful in getting to everybody's questions, which is great. And there's been some really, really good ones. Remember that there's no such thing as a stupid question, that old saying, and it's really true. You know, we were all beginners at one point, and chances are if you have a question, somebody else probably has the same question. And even if they're feeling a bit shy to ask it, they might be relieved that you asked it instead of them. So I'll ask them or I'll answer them in the order they appear. You can also use the raise your hand function. Nobody's actually done that yet, and I'm grateful because I think I will miss it. So please default to the chat section. That would be really great. So it looks like we have some attendees, which is great. And let's get cracking here. I see a couple questions coming in there. Jason says, hello, Jason. I don't know if this is the same Jason that's a returning customer, so to speak. If it is, Jason, welcome back. If it's a new Jason, great to have you here with us. So let's start with Brian's got the first question. Brian says, is yoga a good complement as a stretching routine to my triathlon training? Or is there something else I should be doing? Great question, Brian. There's a lot of things that I think we could classify as being individual. So my own experience with yoga has been very positive. In my best years as an athlete, I did actually do regular yoga once or twice a week. My goal wasn't to be a hardcore, yoga, super flexible individual. It was to enhance the triathlon training that I had in place. And I did find that when I participated in yoga, very gently, I had to take out the ego part of me that wanted to make it a competition. So I would go to these yoga classes and I'd try and be more stretchy than other people. If I did that, I would get into trouble. I would potentially injure myself. So you have to be a little bit careful with your own tendencies towards competition. And certainly I default to that. And yoga is not the space for that. Just the philosophy around yoga in general likes to steer clear of that. So if you can go to yoga and use it as an enhancement, as a recovery, as a way to maybe increase some range of motion for some of the things that you need to do for triathlon, then do it that. If you're going there and you find that you're being highly competitive and trying to be the most stretchy and most flexible person there, you might end up in trouble. So yes, my answer is yes. I think yoga is a nice addition. And I know lots of athletes will do yoga sessions 1, 2, 3 times a week. I know as I become an older athlete, I actually do quite a few yoga poses every single day. I don't participate in a yoga class at the moment. It's a time issue for me. I've got 2 young kids, and it's hard for me to fit in that time as well as do the other workouts that I want to do. But at night, I always go through some yoga poses that make my low back feel better and kind of keep me a little bit mobile in certain areas that I feel are important now. What I will say is that I think once my kids are a little bit older and I free up a little bit more space, a regular yoga class is something that I would like to reintroduce into my life routine. So yes, big fan of yoga, but don't overdo it. Like anything, we have to be careful with how much load we put in our body. And that includes things like mobility and stretching. You just have to tread a little carefully right there. Really great question. Love it. Encourage you. Yes. Include it if you have the time and the space to do so once or twice a week. and don't make it a competition. And that's a thumbs up. What are your thoughts on meditation? Jason says, yeah, what are your thoughts on meditation? Again, huge fan. I think one of the things I became most passionate about in my own racing career was the mindfulness aspect of sport. I really like the idea that sport, for me, was, I did have a high performance aspect. I wanted to compete. I wanted to win. I wanted to be the best physical athlete I could be. But as time progressed, and certainly I get a bit older, I'm as, if not more, interested in the brain side of it and our mindfulness around it. I think sport taught me mentally how to cope with situations, how to be resilient, how to be all those things. And I'm not saying meditation does that, but meditation's part of the mental side of things. And I'm a big fan of it. And actually, I do this little meditative practice. I don't know if it fits into the meditation box super tightly, but it's a little thing I do every single day. Done it for 14, 15 years now. Every single day, I'll take some time. It takes 5 or 10 minutes. I lie on my back. I close my eyes. There's a breathing component to it. And there's some little mantra sort of verses that I say to myself that help the mind and the body relax. So I don't know if what I'm currently doing fits tightly into the meditation box, but it certainly is very similar. And do I notice the effects? Do I feel better? 100%. Absolutely. Yes. And when I miss a couple days of it, I don't feel necessarily as centered and as grounded as I think I could be. So I'm a huge fan of working on the mental side of it. If that's where you would fit meditation, I think that's generally where it fits. Although it does have a huge physical element to it too. If you can teach the body and your physicality to relax and be present and all those other things too, it fits into that box. So big fan of that. I think if you can fit some meditation practice into your daily life, even a few times a week, it will make a big difference. So yes, on the meditation side of it. What I will say is I don't know enough about different meditative practices to really comment on which one is the best for what we're doing. I think I would seek the advice of an expert in that space. But I think some form of it is definitely a good thing. Brian asks, what is your favorite country that you have competed in? Oh, it's a hard one. There's just so many cool races out there. But I think obviously I'm from Canada. And so anytime I compete here, I love Canada. I love competing here. We have great races. We have great grassroots races. The bigger players like Ironman put on great events here too. So definitely that. But obviously when you travel, there's a uniqueness to it and there's something different. So I will add a few little places that I've been and share a couple stories. I did a race in Chile back in 1998. It was kind of an exhibition event where they took 2 athletes from each of the Pan American countries. So a male and a female competitor. And we went down there and there was only 8 people on the start line. And it was a sporting expo, and it was at this huge stadium area. And it had, big 50-meter swimming pools, and it had like a big track for motocross, and it had a velodrome. And the triathlon was very, very short. It was in a 50-meter pool. We did a 400-meter swim, and then we did a 15-kilometer bike ride around the velodrome. And then we did, I think, probably a 3 to 5K run around a running track. And so it was a very tight, contained triathlon with only 8 men and 8 women on the start line. And that was very, very unique. It was right in the middle of Santiago, Chile. It was such a cool thing to do. Funny enough, the event before us, so the 50-meter swimming pool that we swam in was a 50-meter pool, and then it had a bulkhead, and then another 50-meter pool. So when you stretched it out, it was 100 meters in length. There's 2 50-meter pools, and the event right before us was a jet ski event, and they had put ramps in between the 2 pools. So these jet skiers were like jumping between the pools and then doing going around a buoy, and they were doing this race inside the pool. And we were the next event, and the whole pool was like covered in gasoline. It was so funny, sketchy. So that was pretty cool. I mean, it was really neat to go to a country like Chile. I had never been before. I've also competed in Japan. That was really neat. New Zealand is wonderful. Obviously, there's some incredible venues all over the United States. I've competed in Europe. I mean, it's hard to really nail down one place as my absolute favorite, but they all had their, unique aspect to it. And so, yeah, I'll leave it there. I won't pick one favorite. Sorry, non-committal. Devin says, I'm about 6 feet tall and I'm not at my ideal weight, but I'm curious about what the ideal body type is for triathlon. Oh, Devin, this is a tough question because I tread very carefully around body shape and size for obvious reasons. I think sometimes we might hear something and take it to extremes. And usually that's in, running into a calorie deficit if you think you're too big or too heavy for something, and that can get people into trouble. So, but what I will say is one of the most beautiful things about the sport of triathlon, in my opinion, is if you go to an event, you'll see bodies of all shapes and sizes. I think that's really cool. Part of that is that we have 3 different sports. So it might be a benefit to be 6 feet tall as a swim biker. You've got more leverage, you got more of a wingspan if you're swimming. So there's benefits there. And then potentially a 6-foot athlete that's a little bit bigger, that's a little bit of a disadvantage potentially on the run. So triathlon's really neat like that. And then likewise, I was 5'5", about 125 pounds when I raced. So swimming, I was pretty average at, biking pretty average at, but a great runner. And so the races unfolded that way for me. I'd always have a little bit of a deficit out of the water, maybe even more of a deficit coming off the bike, but boy, could I run. And so my body type and size really catered to me being a quicker runner. And I love that part of triathlon. I love that all different shapes and sizes can compete against each other. And over the long haul, so when the day is done, it lines up pretty close. A great example, I used to race against this guy at Ironman Canada. We were pretty good rivals for probably about 5 years. And he was the exact opposite of me. I mean, he must have been 6'2", 6'3", a bigger guy, probably 200 plus pounds for sure. And he was an incredible cyclist. So he would come off the bike with like 10, 15 minutes ahead of everybody. And in races, I would sometimes catch him and I sometimes wouldn't, but it would be very, very close at the end of the day. So he'd have this massive lead on me getting off the bike. And it was all about whether I could reel him in on the run. His running wasn't as strong as mine. And so that's a great example of 2 very different body sizes and very different body shapes, very different strengths in the sport of triathlon. But at the end of the day, we were very close. And I think that's a fun, unique thing about our sport. So what's the ideal body type for triathlon? Well, I don't know if there is one. What I will say is if you go to the World Cup level now, if you look at, the Olympics, they're probably starting to fit more into a tidier box in terms of body shape and size. They're all very lean. The run portion of it is crucial. So, the smaller athletes generally get good enough at swimming, good enough at biking. It's draft legal. So that's a slightly different animal to work with there. And so you have to get off the bike and be able to run very, very quickly. And so typically the faster runners fit more into a certain body, size and shape, which is probably a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, but they still have to be strong enough to hang in there in the swim and the bike. So, but again, if you go to Ironman, yeah, you get I think a broader range of what athletes can look like, and that's pretty cool. Devin says, where can I keep up to date on triathlon news? I'd like to follow more athletes and learn more about the pros. I'm a bit, grouchy about social media sometimes. I certainly came into this sport and I was exiting the sport as social media was coming in. So I never had to sort of deal with and manage that side of it, which I'm grateful for because I think I would have done a terrible job. But what I will say is, gosh, nothing gives you closer, more personal access to the top athletes in any sport or in any industry, whether it's business leaders or, artists or whoever you want to follow. You get an up close and personal look at their lives and what they're doing. And that is one thing I will argue that social media has brought to us, is this just really more intimate look at some of the people that we might want to follow or admire. And I think that's pretty cool. So social media can certainly start there. Like, and you don't have to just stop with the athletes. Like all of the big media outlets like Triathlon Magazine or Triathlon Magazine Canada, or, you know, there's lots of different platforms that are about sort of the news of those sports. And they will also be on social media, whether it's Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or wherever. Like, you can find all of that stuff there. But there are some great publications, both online and in print. Triathlon Magazine is a long time, news reporter of triathlon specifically. And then there's Triathlon Canada magazine, which focuses more on Canadian athletes and some North American athletes as well. They also have a cycling division, so they have Cycling Canada and Running Canada. So these are magazines that are a little more heavily weighted to the Canadian athlete, which is really nice, because as a Canadian athlete, we often wouldn't get the same kind of press that a U.S. athlete would get, which is fair because they have 300 million people, and so maybe they're more interested in their own athletes, and we're quite small in comparison. But at least 2 decades ago, a company started here, and I think they've been very successful. And of course, they have online content with blogs and their articles and their hard copy stuff. So in Canada, that's a good route to go if you're interested in Canadian athletes. In the U.S., Triathlon Magazine, any of the big organizations like Ironman will have blogs, and they'll have their own news reports about their events. I think in Europe, there's a few different publications that you can check out. I'll need to do a bit of research on that, because they seem to change a little bit. I think some of them survive and some of them try and don't necessarily survive. But lots of good options there. Brian says, David Goggins doesn't like to use music as motivation when working out, and most races don't allow it. What are your thoughts on training with music or while listening to podcasts? Ooh, that's potentially a touchy subject. I do appreciate David Goggins' take on that. I'm a little bit like that with certain things. So when I bike and when I run, I don't like listening to music. I like being in tune with what I'm doing and how I'm feeling and finding internal motivation. And so maybe that's what he's talking about a little bit. However, there's actually some decent science around using music as motivation. So if that's a way that gets you up and motivated and inspired to do a workout, then why not? I mean, if it's something that's going to up your level, go for it. I know when I'm doing a gym session, like in the weight room, I always like having music. I like having like kind of music that's got, a good beat to it. And I find uplifting a little bit. That usually I get a bit more out of it. And it's, I don't want to say it takes the monotony out of it, because I'm contradicting myself. I like going for 2-hour trail runs with no music, because I just like being out in the world without any distraction. But in the gym, I do appreciate it. I like it. Certainly if I'm driving to a hard workout, like let's say I have a track workout or something and I'm driving there, I'll crank some really awesome stuff that gets me pumped up. I'm not a huge fan of people riding their bikes with music or podcasts. And that's because I think when we're on a bike, we need all of our senses because we're out in traffic. And so I rarely, if ever, have listened to music unless I'm on a dedicated bike path out in the woods and I know I don't have to deal with cars or traffic. Then maybe a little more, I would do that. But when I ride on the road, it's a hard no for me personally, because I want to make sure that I have my auditory senses always in full alert to hear cars coming up behind me or just to be aware of stuff. So I'm kind of mixed on it. I think it depends on what you're doing. If you need an extra little motivational boost and you get that through music, I don't see a problem with that. So great question though. It's good. I would love to know, Brian, if you have a second to type in the box here, if you do listen to music, I want to know your top 5 pump me up songs. Maybe I'll make a playlist from that. That'd be pretty great. At the moment, I'm like, for some reason, I like all the same music as my 13-year-old daughter. I don't know if that's a good thing to admit, and maybe I shouldn't have admitted that, but we seem to have the same taste in music, much to the dismay of my wife and my 15-year-old son. But when I'm in the car with just my daughter, we're cranking the tunes, and it's all like teenage heartbreak stuff. So I don't know what's going on there. Okay. Devin says, in a recent sprint try I completed, I was topped on the bike course because I passed the mount line. I was topped on the bike course because I passed the mount line, and the official made me back up, get off the bike, and then move forward. What are the rules during each transition that I should be aware of? Well, maybe you meant stopped instead of topped. Okay. So yes, in a triathlon, when you come out of that first transition, so you've gone from swim to bike. So I've got my bike, I'm running out of the transition, there will be a mount line. And that is the line where you have to get past that line before you can get on your bike. And there, it's a hard like no, like you cannot be on your bike before that mount line, and it's safety. They don't want people riding their bikes around transition. Now, a little pro tip for you. One of the best places to actually stand for a little bit of entertainment at a triathlon is the mount and dismount lines of the race, because often if you have this huge group of people coming out, they want to get on their bike right after the mount line, and it's chaos. So you might have, like, if the road comfortably fits 3 or 4 people getting on their bike, sometimes there'll be like 10 or 20 people there all trying to get on their bike, and it's madness, and people are wiping out, and chaos. It's like a great example of what I call race brain, where we're not really thinking and we're not centered. We're sort of like, it's all chaos. One of the most effective things you can do is, instead of getting on your bike right away at the mount line where 15 other people are, just run like 10 meters up the road where it's totally clear, and you'll have clear room to get on your bike. But yes, back to your question or your comment. You have to be past that mount line, or they will, in little grassroots races where they're a little more lenient. Yeah, they're probably just, you stop, you got to go back, and you got to do it properly. And some higher level races, it's like, maybe at a World Cup or the Olympics, either, I actually don't know the rule on this. It's either a time penalty or it's a disqualification. So they're hard about it. Likewise, when you're coming in from the bike, so now you've finished the bike and you're about to get off your bike to go into transition, there will be a dismount line. And often it's the same line in the road. You have to be off your bike. You can't be coasting on your bike. You can't have one foot on the pedal on your bike. Before that front tire even gets to that line, you have to be off of your bike. And it's like a hard no. So, coming in, and again, they don't want people riding their bike in transition. And anything from that mount line onward that I guess they consider transition, is just unsafe to have people, ripping around on their bikes in transition. So yeah, I think I've said this maybe in prior videos or in some of the stuff we do at my Endurance Hub on the daily endurance moments. We've talked about transition, and we've talked about doing a walkthrough of the transition area the day before, so that you know where those mount and dismount lines are. So it's not a surprise. Knowing the flow of transition, and that includes where I can get on my bike and where I have to get off my bike. Really, really important for you to see that the day before, or if you're arriving the morning of, give yourself enough time to do a little walkthrough of the transition. It'll make a huge difference, and hopefully you'll avoid getting any kind of penalty or reprimand from an official. So really good question, though. I like that. What are the rules during each transition that I should be? Well, okay, I'll throw a couple more rules at you. The mount dismount line is one of them. The other thing is, you cannot be touching your bike until your helmet is clipped on. So the very first thing you should do when you get out of the water, out of the swim, get your wetsuit off. If it's a wetsuit swim, everything off. The very, very first thing you should do before you do anything else is get your helmet on and get it buckled. Because you cannot be even like walking or running with your bike with an unbuckled helmet, or certainly no helmet. Like, that's a penalty for sure. They'll make you stop. Hardcore races, maybe you get a time penalty. If it's really bad, I don't know if they disqualify you. I think it's probably a time penalty. But then likewise, when you're coming into transition, so now you're finished the bike, you have to keep that helmet buckled up until your bike is on the rack. So you can't be running to the bike rack and unclip your helmet. If you are in possession of your bike, your helmet has to be done up and clipped, and they'll get you for that every single time. So that's a really important one. Riding your bike in transition, obviously a no. Mount dismount lines, very, very important. There's probably lots more, but those are the main ones I can think of right now. Jason says, Do triathletes lift weights? Well, yes, of course. Some people probably mixed a little bit on that. I was always a huge fan of including strength training in my program. I always felt better. I performed better. I felt like I could generate more power on the bike. And, the important thing to remember is the type of lifting you're doing, what the objective is. And the objective in my mind for a triathlete is injury prevention. So maybe we're working some of those muscle groups that, we have a tendency to overdo certain muscle groups. So for example, in the swim, where we use a lot of the front side here, so we might get rolled in shoulders. And so, in the gym, maybe we work some of the back muscles to kind of pull those shoulders back, get a little bit better posture. Core and hip stability is really important. So in the later stages of a half Ironman or an Ironman where the run is really long, we really want to be stable through the core and the hips. So, our transfer of power is good and we don't start breaking down technically. That's really, really important. Force generation on the bike, really, really important. Having more strength or being able to recruit more of what you've got, really, really important. So I'm a big fan of strength training for various reasons. Not everybody is, but I think there certainly seems to have been a shift in the last kind of decade more towards that. I know when I was racing, people were really mixed on it. Some people didn't do it at all. There is an argument to be made that, if you only have a certain amount of time, so let's say you're juggling work and you're juggling a family, and now, we're asking you to put another 2 or 3 hours on your plate each week to do strength training, that might just be unrealistic. And if your goal is triathlon, swim, bike, run, those are probably the main things that you should focus on. But what you can do is add sort of these little 10, 15-minute strength sessions at the end of a run or the end of a bike that just tick some of the main boxes, like that core and hip stability work, like maybe a little bit of mobility through the shoulders if you need a bit more of that. So you can add in little short, quote, strength training sessions that aren't exactly strength training sessions, but fit in a little bit into that box, and that can be helpful as well. Fan of lifting weights if you can fit it in. Always, consult an expert in that regard. Don't just start randomly lifting weights. I mean, there's a method to it, and you should do it properly. And the person helping you with that should know what your objective is. If it's triathlon or running or cycling, whatever, they should know what your ultimate objective is. Devin says, is it worthwhile to buy a tri singlet for sprint triathlons? I think, yeah. If you're going to do a one-off and that's it, tick the box, I'm done, wear kind of whatever. I mean, if you wear baggy board shorts and a t-shirt, it's not going to be super comfortable riding your bike in that or running in that. But if your intention is to do maybe a couple of these and maybe go from a sprint to an Olympic to a half, or definitely invest in a proper triathlon outfit. They're designed the way they are for a certain reason. One is that you can use the same garment for the entire race. You don't have to get changed. The other is that they're a little tighter fitting, so they're going to be a bit more aerodynamic and more comfortable to ride your bike in. They might even have some little side pockets for nutrition. They'll be more comfortable for running, and certainly we can get chafing on the inner parts of our legs, which can be very uncomfortable, whereas a bike short type material down there sometimes helps with the chafing, which is nice. But the big thing is like speed and performance. If you don't have to change clothing from swim to bike to run, you're going to move a lot quicker. You simplify the whole process. So yes, I would definitely recommend doing that for sure. Brian says, I found out that I can't draft in a triathlon race and I only have 25 to 30 seconds to pass someone. Can you talk about the other rules of cycling and triathlon? So yeah, most triathlons, especially for amateurs or age group racing, there is not drafting. Drafting is when you can ride your bike. You can see my hands. So you can ride your bike very close to someone else. So if this is a cyclist and I'm another cyclist, when I'm drafting, I can be very close to their back wheel. And that makes it much more efficient because the person in front of me is breaking the wind. And it's a massive difference. If you ever watch the Tour de France or any kind of any kind of bike race, you'll see that they're all in a big pack, and they often protecting their climber or the rider that they want to win the race. And they're doing that because it makes it much more efficient for them to ride. So if you're if you're that person on, behind 3 or 4 other riders, you can move at like 40, 50K an hour without much effort. And the people in the front are doing all the effort. So back to your question about triathlon. Yeah. You cannot draft. I mean, the original intention of triathlon was to see who is the best swimmer, the best biker, the best runner, all tied together. And if you're drafting off of a really strong cyclist, well, not sure if that makes you the strongest cyclist. Now, so for Ironman, half Ironman, most short course, like grassroots amateur racing, you cannot draft on the bike. You have to be X number of meters behind that person. However, if you watch the Olympics or you watch any World Cup racing, they have made it draft legal. And so you might be wondering, well, why did they do that? Well, one of the main reasons they did it is it was so hard to enforce because all of these athletes were so evenly matched across the board. They would all come out of the water together. And now, like, there's just not enough road for them to spread out. And it became almost impossible to enforce that rule because there just wasn't enough room for everybody to be on. Like, you've got 40 athletes all get out of the water together. There's only so much road to work with. Like, it almost became impossible. That was one thing. The other argument they made is that it just made it more exciting. It made it more like a bike race. So in bike racing, there's criterium racing where you're going around in, a loop multiple times. And so a lot of people argued, well, that, we're not seeing who the strongest cyclist is. Well, you kind of still are. It's still a component of it. It's just not a straight up time trial cyclist. It's not measuring who's the best at doing like 40K in a straight line and aero bars. But it is a measure of like who can corner well and who can accelerate out of the corners well and who's tactically really well. And that's also part of bike racing. So an argument could be made either way. I do think for the Olympics and for World Cups where the speed is so high and the level is very evenly matched, I think it was the right call. It was just too hard to enforce. Otherwise, always like drama at the end of those races. Like, so-and-so was drafting and it was always a fight. Now you kind of just take that component out of it and that's the way it goes. So, but yeah, you do have, if you are behind somebody and you make the decision to pass, then you have 25 to 30 seconds. That's generally the rule. I think you might want to check that at each event. But you have that time frame to actually get past their front wheel. And as soon as you've moved past their front wheel, it's their obligation now to back off and get back into that legal distance apart from where you are. Other rules, well, there's rules around equipment. So, aero bars, those bars you put on the front where people look like they're in a ski tuck position, that's something that you can have in non-drafting races, but you cannot have those bars in draft legal races. I think you can have little mini versions of them, but there's regulations on how long they can be. Bike safety stuff is always a thing. So you'd have to have properly working brakes and that kind of thing. There's probably rules around not having a disc wheel is a wheel that is fully solid and like filled in because it's more aerodynamic. You can usually have that on the back of your bike, so the rear wheel, but you cannot have that on the front wheel. And the reason for that is if you have any kind of crosswind, that front wheel is your steering wheel and it acts like a bit like a sail. So if wind hits it and now you're kind of weaving all over the road, that's very unsafe. There's wheel restrictions in Hawaii and Kona because the winds get so strong there. They don't let people ride discs there. And I'm pretty sure there's like a maximum amount of like, they call it a deep dish carbon. So if you ever see the wheels, they're like this big kind of ring of carbon that goes around. And in a traditional wheel, it'll be like, that deep. But in some of the fancier wheels, it can get really, really deep. And it's almost like a disc. So there'll be a rule around how much, depth of we call it deep dish wheel you can have. Yeah, those are the ones I can kind of think of now. I don't know if wheel size, there's probably a rule around wheel size. Like, I don't know if you can have a wheel that's bigger in the back, smaller in the front. We used to do that. I used to have a bike that was a 27-inch in the back and a 26-inch in the front. I'm not sure if that's legal anymore. Yeah, that's all I got for right now. No, actually, I got more. The rules of cycling. You can't cross the center line. That's another one. You have to stay right unless you're passing. If you're passing, you can come out a little bit. But otherwise, you have to kind of be on the right side of the road. You can't litter. So if you have nutrition or bottles, you can't just randomly chuck them. You have to, there's usually designated areas where you can discard that at the aid stations. But if you discard anywhere else, that's a penalty for sure. It might even be a disqualification. Yeah, I think that's about all I got for now. Do you recommend wearing sunglasses and a hat in a triathlon? It depends. If I was doing a sprint race and it was really important and there was money on the line and, it was like a really important sprint race, I probably wouldn't wear any of that. I would keep it as simple as I possibly could. Now, big argument to be made wearing sunglasses on the bike from a safety perspective. You don't want to get a bug in the eye or a random like rock that's spit up from a car or a bike tire. So sunglasses were pretty much non-negotiable for me for any type of the bike because it was a safety issue. I didn't want to get something in my eye. However, those short, fast races, yeah, sometimes I would just wear nothing. I would try and keep it as simple as possible so my transitions could be really, really fast. For longer events, from a comfort perspective, I certainly wouldn't want to run a marathon without glasses because you're just out in the elements and that's a long time kind of staring into the sun, especially if the sun's in your face. And it's nice to have glasses. A hat, sometimes I'd wear a visor because it allowed heat to escape from my head. I didn't want to trap heat into my head. So if it was a hot day, I'd avoid the hat. However, sometimes we wear a hat because you could shove ice up there and that would act as a cooling mechanism. So it comes down really to personal preference. Whatever the answer is for you, I would first